and do not necessarily reflect the views of Urban One Incorporated, Radio One, or any of its subsidiary companies. Attorney Nathaniel Lee, a lawyer with credibility, success, and experience, representing people in hundreds of jury trials, Nathaniel Lee is who you want by your side in the courtroom. You've seen the rest, now hire the best. Contact Lee, Cosell, and Feigley today. And now, to address the legal concerns of the community, Praise AM 1310, 95.1 FM presents Legally Speaking. Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. Special thanks to I've fallen down in South Florida. I did get your emails and your texts. Thank you for watching our show. Also, the people in Chicago. Today we have, of course, our superstar panel. We have Attorney Vanita Banks, a master. She's also a cybersecurity expert. And also Marlon Prime, former U.S. Department of Justice counsel in Ohio. And also we have the superstar prosecutor, Ryan Mears. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing today?
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Yeah, we're going to start off. Prosecutor Mears, you've been watching, like everybody else, we got this bad weather in Indianapolis. This ice problem, we saw in the month of January, ice killed 8 people, but 2 of them was recorded by cameras, cell phones and otherwise. And a lot of people was concerned about this type of activities. What happens, from a prosecutor standpoint, you're watching this type of thing unfold. Do you have any concerns about that coming to our city?
Well, hopefully we're all concerned, and not only coming to Indianapolis, but other cities around the country. And, as a prosecutor, I'd like to think that we all stand for the uncontroversial proposition that nobody is above the law. Yet we are seeing people act in a way where they seem to have little or no regard for our Constitution. The current Department of Justice has routinely defied federal court orders. They routinely violate people's constitutional rights. And their initial response to 2 people being killed in our streets was to investigate the victims as opposed to the people who actually pulled the trigger. And so I think that sends a pretty chilling effect on people in the community, in particular people who are vulnerable right now. And I think it also goes to show the importance of state actors and locally elected state officials to help stand up against what's going on with the federal government, because this Department of Justice has made it very clear that a federal court order doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot to them. I think everybody on this panel is probably aware of all the different contempt hearings that have taken place with different branches of the Department of Justice because they just haven't complied with federal court orders. And so, we all as attorneys hopefully think that nobody is above the law and that the law should apply equally to everyone. And that's just not what we're seeing right now with some of the things that are taking place.
Attorney Banks, I know you had some questions. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I need to come off of mute. We are continuing to see ICE enforcement actions across the nation. Of course, there's been a big focus on Minneapolis, but these raids are occurring across the country, from Chicago to Boston to LA. And we also saw last week that a court denied Attorney General Keith Ellison's suit demanding that ICE withdraw from Minneapolis. We saw the so-called border czar, Tom Homan, going to Minneapolis ostensibly to attempt to de-escalate the situation. We saw Bovino sent back home to his day job, and Kristi Noem virtually silenced last week. Holman announced that 700 troops would be leaving Minneapolis soon. And of course, 3,000 ICE um, troops had descended on Minneapolis, which only has 600 police officers. And we also know that these ICE agents are not trained in de escalation, in crowd control, and there was no strategic plan in the uh, deployment of these folks, and they're being unleashed on American cities across the nation.
And Nate, just to put that troop number in perspective, I mean, we have somewhere in the city of Indianapolis right around 1,400, 1,500 sworn law enforcement officers.
Mhm.
And they're responsible for everything that goes on in the city of Indianapolis. And you're talking about 3,000 ICE officers in a smaller, square mile area, with one goal. They're not responding to traffic accidents. They're not responding to theft cases. They're not responding to just the day-to-day things that law enforcement responds to. I mean, that is an extraordinary number of people and personnel, which is why so many people in Minnesota feel like this is an occupation as opposed to people patrolling and being there to help, because the sheer numbers are just astounding, especially when you compare it to what other law enforcement agencies typically have on the streets to try to help keep us safe under, ordinary circumstances.
Okay, we got a quick caller. Caller, you have a question or comment for us today? Reverend Phillips, go ahead, sir.
Yes, I got a question for Mr. Ryan Neer, the prosecutor now. Mr. Ryan Neer, when the court put no contact on people, do y'all supposed to force that law? Like, say if somebody have a no contact order and they come around the victim, you call the police. The police look like they don't want to do nothing because I think they don't know that law. Okay, and we got some police officers don't know the law, how it's supposed to run, like the community. And y'all get on the TV, y'all want the community help. But shoot, when the community help you, y'all feel like, I don't know the question. Okay, that means they play cuckoo, boo boo, the foo foo.
Okay, so the point. Okay, hey caller. So the point you're making is that
sir.
You have a question. You're saying that you're trying to say, how do you enforce a no contact order? Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now
yes,
stop.
yes,
Okay,
yes,
you can respond. Go ahead.
Yeah, so certainly if there's a no contact order that's been entered by the court, law enforcement should have access to that, and they should be able to access that from their police card to see and verify if the no contact order is in effect. It sounds like you're talking about a very specific situation or circumstance, and hopefully there's a time where we can chat and I can provide more specific information in that case, but that's generally speaking how it's supposed to work.
Okay, thank you. Attorney Primes, go ahead, sir.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Nathaniel, Vanita, and Attorney Ryan. Certainly nice to have you here. I worked as a federal prosecutor for 30 years, as you can see in my seal behind me. And, I think it's important to give Nathaniel's audience context. I'm sure your experience was similar to mine in the sense that certainly the department was never perfect. There were always, challenges. But I just want to see if you can give the audience a sense of how far there's been a departure from recognized norms. For example, we were instructed, I'm sure a part of your training as well, if any federal judge said anything critical of, you as an assistant U.S. attorney or a prosecutor, that immediately had to be reported to your supervisor, that immediately had to, go to Washington. And now we have instances where the chief immigration judge has indicated for all the judges around the country that the immigration judges did not have to follow federal judge orders. And then you have Chief Judge Boasberg out of D.C. Who has initiated some contempt proceedings because of a direct refusal of the administration to abide by orders to halt the deportation of various migrants. Can you kind of give the audience, where we were and where we're at now to give people a sense how far we've gone?
I think that's such a great point because, going into this, I think everybody was kind of afraid of a federal court order. And everybody certainly was not only respectful of that order, but went to extraordinary lengths to make sure that everybody complied with a federal court order. And we are seeing a significant departure from what was really just standard operating procedure for everybody who is involved in the system. And we are a state court actor, and if a federal court directs us to do something, we do it. And that was true of almost all federal agencies up until this point. And I think what's particularly interesting right now in terms of where we find ourselves, you have federal judges who are asking not for the rank and file people who are on the street, but upper levels of management in the Department of Justice. They're being summoned to Minneapolis. They're being asked, and they are potentially being held in contempt, which is totally unprecedented. Where you see folks from Washington, D.C. that are being brought in because these federal judges are becoming more and more frustrated with the fact that the agents on the ground, federal orders just are not being complied with. And they're trying to find somebody who's willing to accept responsibility and say, I got your order and I'm willing to do what I have been ordered to do. A federal court order is not an invitation, it's an obligation. You have to follow it, you have to comply with it. And that's one of the things that I think I hope everybody is paying attention to is, that's kind of the thing that holds us all together is we go into the judicial system and right or wrong, whether you agree with the decision or not, we all have to respect the process and we have to respect the decision. And for so many people right now, those decisions are not being respected. And the result of that is people who have been told, hey, you can no longer detain these people, they're still being held in custody. People who are being deported after federal judges said, hey, you can't deport this individual, they're still being deported. And that type of behavior just didn't exist. Really, I can't think of any other administration or any other time where those types of things occurred. And that's something that hopefully is getting the attention of everybody involved in this process.
Last week, a Minnesota chief federal judge threatened to hold the head of ICE in contempt, accusing ICE of violating 96 court orders in January alone. And that's more than some federal agencies have violated in their entire existence. And so my understanding is that he later backed off of this, his contempt threat after ICE released a man from Ecuador who the judge said had been illegally locked up for more than 2 weeks.
Yeah, I
We're
think
also
part
seeing prosecutors resign and step down from their post. I read about one of the prosecutors that said that she was so exhausted because there's so many hundreds of cases are flooding the Minnesota courts. And so one prosecutor stated that, and I quote, "Sometimes I wish you would just hold me in contempt, Your Honor, so that I could have a full 24 hours of sleep."
Mm.
She said, and I quote, "The system sucks. This job sucks." Of course, she was removed from her role after that outburst or cry for help.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, that's just reprehensible, and I think that this is a cautionary tale for all lawyers and also for all employees that you have to recognize, hey, there's a point where you're not going to go. And I just really applaud a number of Department of Justice employees that say, hey, my ethics is more important than having this job, and they have resigned. And unfortunately, as a result of that, we're seeing, just mass vacancies in U.S. attorneys' offices around the country, particularly in Minnesota. So, my concern is, who are going to fill those very important roles. Because as your guest, Ryan, will attest, an individual prosecutor has so much discretion. And so we're hopeful that, they'll fill those with people that will recognize that they have an obligation to the rule of law and not to an individual. So it'll be interesting to see how this progresses. But my other question to, Ryan would be, can you really describe again how different this whole process of having a shooting and how the administration responded to that, and compare that to what would happen normally? Because we had in this administration, even after the shooting of two American citizens, there was an immediate, indication that somehow they were culpable, their families were investigated. Can you juxtapose that to, what happens under normal circumstances? So again, the audience can kind of see a departure from where we're at now and where we've been previously.
I mean, this is a significant departure in the sense that the local authorities are not even involved in the process. The local law enforcement agencies do not have access to information. They don't have the ability to question witnesses. Video evidence that is being preserved and procured through search warrants and subpoenas is not being shared. And the local prosecutor's office has been completely cut out of the decision-making process, which is obviously not the way these things should be conducted. Just so people know, the vast majority of the time, the local agency takes the lead on homicide investigations involved in these shootings, and your federal partners are there to assist and to augment the investigation because they have access to different tools and resources that could potentially be helpful, in particular with the advancements that take place in technology. So if you have cell phones that you're struggling to get into, oftentimes the FBI is in a better position to crack those phones than maybe your local law enforcement authorities. And they're always willing to lend their expertise in different areas that might arise during the investigations. But usually these are locally led investigations, and there's always a partnership and there's always a sharing of information because ultimately, at the end of the day, everybody's trying to get to the truth and everybody's trying to figure out what takes place. And the local prosecutor's office is involved, the U.S. Attorney's office is involved. Does it make sense for this to be a federal prosecution or a state prosecution? Oftentimes, you have both a federal and state prosecution. And so it's really interesting to see how the federal government this time has said, nope, we're the only ones who are going to investigate this. The state law enforcement, you're not permitted to be a part of this. The local prosecutor's office is not permitted to be a part of this. That's really a challenge because a lot of times there's violations of state law. The state law and the federal law do not completely overlap. And so there are situations where you have a potential violation of state law, so it makes sense for the state authorities to be involved. You have a potential violation of federal law. It makes sense for your federal partners to evaluate those things. But those conversations are happening in conjunction with one another, where everybody's at the table and everybody's having the conversation. And that's just not what we're seeing here. This is entirely being led by the federal authorities. And I think everybody is skeptical of what that investigation is going to look like because initially they said they're not even investigating the shooting, they're investigating the victims. And I think the other significant departure that you see is the Department of Justice used to say nothing about investigations. They wouldn't utter a word. And you used to work for the Department of Justice, so you know this better than anybody. They don't say anything until they make a charging decision. They don't even confirm the existence of an investigation. Now you have people openly commenting on victims. You have people openly offering their opinions on the motives and the intentions of victims. That type of behavior never would have taken place. And you never see local law enforcement doing those types of things where they almost immediately begin that process of trying to undermine the credibility of the victim to try to rationalize choices that people made. And so these investigations are not how things normally take place. And the editorial commentary that's taking place from federal officials never took place and was never allowed. And you used to work in the Department of Justice. I mean, they have guidelines for everything in terms of what you can and cannot say. And I guess those guidelines have been thrown out the window because that's something that it was very difficult for federal authorities really to ever say anything, especially while a case was pending.
Right. The training was no comment.
Right.
Hey, I got another issue that concerns me, and I don't understand this. I do a lot of litigation, but this didn't make any sense. So Don Lemons, along with three other people, arrested for uh, the taking statements and doing journalism in that church, city church in St. Paul, Minnesota. And they're covering it, they're recording statements, they're talking interviews. And so someone tried to file charges in Minnesota, and apparently no judge would sign it. And somehow the case get filed in LA. I don't understand that. So they go video shopping from Minnesota to LA and he get arraigned in LA. And I don't get that, Mark. Maybe you could explain that. I don't understand how they did
Well,
that.
well, this is so bizarre. And again, Ryan's right. There's just been a grave departure from norms. Now, typically, what happens is you're going to a local magistrate judge as relates to an arrest warrant. And once that magistrate judge makes a determination that, hey, there's not enough evidence, what typically happens is that the federal government and the federal officials tighten up their case. And what happened in this case is there was pushback by the federal authorities, and they went to the chief judge of that district and said, hey, the magistrate made a mistake. And the chief judge wrote a scathing opinion and said that, hey, in all his years on the bench and the experience of his colleagues, which, had over 40 years, they said this had never happened. Then, if that wasn't enough, you have the federal judge saying, hey, there is not enough evidence to arrest Don Levin. So that in normal times would have been enough to say, okay, to federal authorities, hey, we're going to stop right here. We're going to either reevaluate our case or drop the case. And instead, they went to the appellate court, which also said no. And then that wasn't enough. Then they went over to LA to get another arrest warrant. So it's just, it's really reprehensible because, we are, a government of laws. And, when I was there at the Department of Justice, certainly it was not perfect. It had its flaws. But, there was a respect for, judicial branch. And if a judge, particularly one with lifetime tenure, says, hey, start all over again, there's not enough here, that's what we would do. And so right now we just see federal officials just thumbing their nose at federal district court judges and not really taking a cue that perhaps there's some flaws in the cases. And not only is it showed in this context, but it showed in context of indictments that are brought forth and charges where juries basically acquit individuals. So it's really reprehensible. It takes a lot of money and resources to work these cases up, and you're having cases that are being thrown out because, there isn't that listening to the judicial branch, in my view.
And
I know,
Nate, just to piggyback on that, like as a prosecutor, you appreciate that feedback because that's the court saying, hey, I don't think you even have probable cause. Then that says to you, there's no way I'm going to win this thing at trial, and I need to go back to the drawing board, and we need to make sure that we are doing a better job, and we need to continue to build this investigation. We need more facts, we need more evidence, because an independent person's telling us, I don't even think you're a probable cause, let alone reasonable doubt. And so what typically happens is when you get that, it's like, okay, fellas, we got to work harder. We need to continue to build this case. We need to make this case stronger. And instead, they just form shopped and they went the, you know, they just finally searched for a judge who was willing to find probable cause. That should tell you all you need to know about the strength of the case when multiple judges said, I don't even think you have probable cause, let alone reasonable doubt. Most prosecutors would just, go back to the drawing board and say, hey, we need to do more to build this case up. In this situation, they said, no, we like our case and we'll just find a judge who agrees with us.
And Don Lemon agreed to turn himself in.
Right.
His attorney had been in touch with the officials, but yet, as he was in LA covering the Grammys, a dozen officers arrested him when he showed up in court. When he appeared in court, the prosecution was demanding that his passport be revoked, that that there, I can't remember the amount of bail they were asserting, as well as that he could only travel from New York, California, and Minneapolis. Um, it's important that our callers understand that the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
Yeah, those are really important points, Attorney Banks. And one of the norms that hasn't been adhered to in this administration is that there were specific guidelines anytime federal officials were contemplating charging a defense attorney. You had to meet an overly high standard, and the same was true for journalists. You had to meet an overly high standard. A lot of those decisions had to go to Washington because of the sensitivity of making sure that we're not infringing upon constitutional rights. Because the key to democracy is to have a free press. And also we want to make sure that individuals have a right to be represented. So this is just another example of norms kind of going by the wayside. And it's something that's certainly, troubling in my view. And maybe our guest could speak to, his perspective.
I mean, just want to completely agree with that. I mean, there should be so much thought put into anytime you're going to implicate someone's constitutional rights, and in particular, the right to a free press. And, why would you want to engage in that battle, that legal battle, that constitutional question, on a case that is borderline at best? Even if you get past the constitutional issues, there are significant challenges to the fact of did he actually even break the law? And you had multiple magistrates and federal judge telling you actually there's not even probable cause that he broke federal law. So you not only have he's not only has these constitutional protections in terms of him doing his job and being a member of the press corps, but secondarily, you don't have a good case factually. And you had multiple federal judges tell you don't have a good case factually. So it seems to me that maybe this is a good time to move on. But instead, this administration doubled down. And to Attorney Banks's point, they asked for a $100,000 bond and GPS for Don Lemon. And thankfully, the judge in Los Angeles OR'd him because there's a lot of things going on in California. I don't think most people are worried about Don Lemon being on our streets.
Absolutely. Now, I'm wondering from any of the attorneys or my colleagues, why do you think that the prosecutors were able to get a grand jury indictment?
Well, the old adage, you can indict a ham sandwich. And,
Okay.
I think the audience should understand in terms of, the grand jury process, you don't need unanimity. and it's only the prosecutor's only presenting one side of the story. Now, Justice Department guidelines, indicate that, you should, present, evidence that shows the person doesn't have guilt. But as we saw in the Jim Comey case and Letitia James, that those norms weren't adhered to. So, that may be a situation that occurred here. The other thing that's really important to note is that if you look at some of the press reports as relates to the Don Lemon case, it involved a group that was going to disrupt these church services because apparently someone that was the preacher there, was involved with ICE. And certainly we can agree to disagree about whether that makes sense. But they interviewed this individual, and she said in no uncertain terms that we didn't tell anybody about the details of what we were doing. And certainly Don Lemon wasn't involved in the conspiracy because we didn't tell him. So that type of evidence, had that been presented to a grand jury, and we don't know if it was or not, that would be, at least devastating for the case. But again, your audience has to understand that the grand jury is a one-sided process. And as a result, you can get, results that in the grand scheme of things don't amount to much.
I think the other thing too is just this Department of Justice does not have a great track record with what goes on in the grand jury ultimately being upheld. I mean, you mentioned James Comey and Attorney General James's cases. There were irregularities in the grand jury process, and judges took and they said in their opinions, this is an extraordinary step, but they dismissed the indictments. And I think that's a reflection of the process that is currently being used. And so there might be that initial indictment, but after the fact, once defense counsel has an opportunity to see, hey, were appropriate procedures followed? Did they follow the law in terms of how they conducted the grand jury process? We've had a couple of federal judges say no, that this was not done in accordance with the rules governing the grand jury process, and have consequently dismissed the indictment.
And the indictment included the 2-count indictment was for conspiracy to violate and violation of the freedom to exercise religion. And it's clear from the video that Don Lemon was covering the protest inside the church, that he was asking questions of members, including the pastor who has been assertedly stated that he's an ICE official or involved with ICE in some way. But this unprecedented attack, at least in modern times, on the First Amendment freedom of the press cannot be tolerated, and would have a chilling effect that we must object to in the highest of terms.
Hey, okay, moving forward, there's a dozen other issues, so let's move forward. There's one other thing that not in order of importance, but there's one that struck me, Marlon, Vanita, is Washington Post laid off 1/3 of its staff. I subscribe to the Washington Post, and I was so upset at them I didn't renew my membership. But what's going on there? And why is that so important?
Well, this is really a challenge. Many of your members may be, your listeners, Nathaniel, maybe they don't remember, the Watergate investigation that ultimately led to the resignation of President Nixon. And it was a Washington Post that really invested the time to do that investigation. And it resulted in, seeing a lot of problems in terms of enemies lists, in terms of, taping that was just inappropriate. And so, what the Washington Post has really been in a unique situation to put a spotlight on all administrations to making sure they're adhering to the rule of law, they're doing what they say they're going to do. And so to have that venerable paper that has provided information not only to people in the Washington, D.C. area, but around the country is certainly problematic. And so what happened, even before 1/3 of the staff was laid off, a lot of the opinion writers that really held, both Democratic and Republican administrations accountable, a lot of them, left before this layoff. So the newspaper is a shell of itself. And so the moniker that the Washington Post had was "Democracy Dies in the Darkness." And, their whole role was to put a spotlight to make sure that statements that are being made are accurate. And without that spotlight, I think we all suffer. So I think it's something that we all should look at, and not only in terms of the Washington Post, but looking at, public radio, that being defunded, and a lot of newspapers around the country. I don't know how things are in Indianapolis, but a lot of, your local newspapers are a shell of them former selves. And so without, having active journalists, trained journalists, having the resources to investigate, to dig deep, I think it hurts us all.
What I was concerned about is that when you have a government that does not report statistics, it's hard to plan. Like, for example, the person that reported the labor and employment news, layoffs and job growth, they get fired. And so my concern is that if you don't have a newspaper that go out and collects evidence that's accurate, how can you plan, for example, for retirement and things like that? In other words, we have a stock market that's volatile now. It went way down, went way back up this week. And we're seeing things that are unusual. In our country now, we have probably the highest inventory of homes to be sold because we have a mass migration of Canadians, like in Florida, and then you have people leaving. But without accurate news, I'm really concerned is that how do you make financial plans anymore? It just bothered me because I rely on information from newspapers to give me accurate information concerning, particularly the state of our economy and things like that. So now, if we eliminate all this objective news, then what are we as a country? Are we going into a totalitarian regime or something? Because right now, I'm concerned that the lack of accurate information. I'm not sure how that affects you guys thinking, but it bothers me that we're continuing to lose this objectivity in our news cycle.
Well, that is why it's critically important to support the independent press. Journalists like Don Lemon and Joy Reid and the Black press and others. And it's important to do your own research and ensure that information that you're ingesting is from a trusted source. I wanted to go back a moment to the role of lawyers. And Charles Hamilton Houston, who, among many other things, was a mentor to the first Black Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, stated that a lawyer that is not a social engineer is a parasite on society. And I've tried to govern my career by those words. And lawyers have an obligation to protect the rule of law. But what we are witnessing is some large law firms actually capitulated to this administration when they had the most strength and power to advocate against the illegal executive orders mandated by this administration. And we also saw that those lawyers and law firms that pushed back are actually winning their cases in the court. So I say that law firms, lawyers, the Fortune 1000, universities, and other institutions should push back against these unconstitutional actions. And Attorney Lee, I think we've crossed the line uh, into authoritarianism in this country. People ask, are we in a constitutional crisis? Well, we emerged into a constitutional crisis, in my view, shortly after the inauguration in January
Okay.
of last year.
Okay. Hey, Prosecutor Mears, there's a bunch of questions for you. One of the ones that really is important, Governor Mike Braun is pushing legislation to have the National Guard have arrest powers and patrol city neighborhoods. I thought that's got to be a dumb idea. Does he not know what military soldiers are trained to do? When I was in the military, we were trained to do one thing only, kill people. I don't get this.
Not only that, I mean, it used to be one of the kind of basic provisions in terms of our contract with the government was we're not going to use our military on our own citizens. And to do that is a striking departure from what we all need and kind of what we all grew up with. We spend a lot of time trying to build trust in our community, and we spend a lot of time trying to work with our community in terms of trying to figure out how does the community want to be policed? How does the community need to be policed? How can we have the biggest impact on public safety? And the solution to those problems is to not bring in people from outside of Indianapolis who don't have experience with Indianapolis, who are not familiar with Indianapolis, and who do not have the training in terms of de-escalation, conflict resolution, all the different types of things that we want a world-class police department to have. It makes no sense to bring them in when they don't have any of those skills and they're not trained to do that. I think it's also important to remember that, like, if we're serious, if we want to have the best police force in the country, and hopefully we do, this is a pretty big slap in the face to them, because what you're saying is they can't get the job done. And we need to not only supplement, but take over their day-to-day responsibilities with people who are effectively part-time. The National Guard's a part-time, and we have officers every single day who wake up, who try to hopefully help our community and try to protect and serve our community. And they're being told that's not enough. And so I think it's a poor choice for a lot of reasons. I think the solution to whatever problems the government, or in particular the governor, is searching for could be better addressed through other avenues and other issues. There's a lot of ways that you can have an impact on public safety other than having young people from other parts of the state walk around with semi-automatic rifles in downtown Indianapolis, which is what they want to do. They parrot a lot of what Donald Trump does, and he nationalized the National Guard and brought in the National Guard in Washington, D.C. and other places. And so they want to do that here. And the reality is, not only is it not necessary, it's going to erode that trust that so many people have worked so hard to try to build between law enforcement and the community, because we have people who were not a part of those conversations coming in now assuming law enforcement responsibilities.
Yeah, the only thing that I would like them to do is get rid of some of the snow on the ground everywhere, shovel some snow. But the idea of having people with automatic weapons walking the street is a dumb idea. But the other issue I missed this, they were saying that there were some people trying to get legislation for the death penalty by firing squad. I thought that was unconstitutional a long time ago, but they weren't. Is that being bought in the legislators now to bring back the death penalty?
There's a couple of bills related to what type of execution would be permissible under Indiana law, and legislators actually advanced these bills. They had committee hearings on these bills, and aside from the constitutional concerns, to me, it's like, why are we trivializing something as serious as ultimately making the determination as to whether or not we're going to seek the death sentence for somebody or not? And to trivialize that process and trivialize the methods that are ultimately used, I think takes away from the seriousness of the discussion, takes away from the seriousness of the process, and also reflects kind of those legislators' um, intent to really have a positive impact on the community. You only get to submit 10 bills, and if one of your 10 bills is, hey, I think we need a firing squad, I think it tells you everything you need to know about where that person's mind is in terms of what they think the community needs.
Terrible. Now, Attorney Banks, you had made us aware of this. Of course, there's about 10 other topics. Let's try to hit a couple. The Epstein file. This is getting out of control. It looked like every time they say that Trump is mentioned over thousands of times, we see something crazy come out the White House. Attorney Banks.
Well, again, this is an example of the Department of Justice not following the law. Legislation was passed which ordered the Justice Department to release the Epstein files in totality back in December. I believe it was December 19th. And so that wasn't done. And more recently, this past week, I believe 3.5 million or 3 million of the remaining 6.5 million files were released, and including the president, who's been named in the files hundreds, thousands of times, other top executives spanning every industry from technology to law to medicine have been named in these files hundreds of thousands of times. And what happened was, and I don't know that we've ever seen such a sloppy production of documents where the victims who were names were supposed to be redacted were not redacted. And unfortunately, photos and other information was not redacted regarding the victims, and the businessmen and other executives who are named in the files, their names have been redacted in so many instances. And so the latest I heard is that Congress will be able to review the unredacted files this week, but they've got to go to the DOJ office and they can take notes, but they can't take anything out of the office. And then, of course, the Clintons are scheduled to testify before a congressional committee in late February, and they are demanding that their testimony be in public so that the public can see exactly what's going on with these Epstein files.
Hey, here's what I don't understand. I've not been with the Department of Justice or in a prosecutorial role, but you got 3 to 5 million you got 3 to 5 million documents, right? You do all this investigation, and the way I understand it, 2 people get indicted on all these millions of pages. So that tells me there was an extensive amount of investigation. So why do you have this much investigation? It just seemed like to me it's a terrible waste of taxpayer money to have this much investigation. And, I mean, what are they doing? I just don't get this concept of having 5 million pages of records and for Epstein. And that's the part that I'm baffled about. You've done all this investigation all these years, done all these interviews, and why?
Well, I may take a different view than Prosecutor Ryan Mears and others, but my view of it is that the mark of any advanced or civilized society is that you protect your youth, full stop, and it's all hands on deck. Many, people like myself grew up in the Catholic Church. And despite us growing up in that fashion, when there was evidence of a scandal, there were legislatures that got involved. They extended statute of limitations. There were independent investigation. There's no way the Department of Justice should be investigating this, especially since the President of the United States has been named. There's no way that you can be perceived to be unbiased. So full stop right now, immediately, there should be an independent prosecutor and there should be an extension of the statute of limitations. Forget trying to embarrass, someone who's a Democrat or Republican. Appoint an independent prosecutor, have a real investigation. And if people have harmed, young, innocent girls, that they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, irrespective if you're a Democrat or Republican. Stop the hearings, because the problem is if you have hearings, then you could unwittingly, cause a constitutional issue where the person won't be prosecuted, because if you're compelling them to testify in a congressional hearing, then it may impact your ability to prosecute them. So stop the shenanigans, independent prosecutor, extend the statute of limitations, get to the bottom of it. What were you doing there? What did you see? Who are the victims? Get them under closed door. Who was there? And if they're culpable, they should be presumed innocent. But if they're culpable, they should go to jail. Full stop.
I just wanted to echo and very much appreciate what you just said and how you said it, because I think a lot of times people get caught up in the salaciousness of the Epstein scandal and the big names, but there are real consequences to this behavior. And we saw it with one of the victims who was involved, took her own life. These types of crimes are devastating to people. And the allegation here is that many of these women were incredibly vulnerable. They were oftentimes disadvantaged economically. And a lot of times they were dealing with women who were less than 18 years of age, which is ultimately what Epstein pled guilty to. And so, when we have these conversations, I hope people remember that there's like a real world human cost here to people who have been harmed by this conduct. And everybody wants to get caught up in the big names. And it's interesting to me because every time Trump gets in trouble, he throws out more documents. It's like, hey, release another batch of documents so people will start talking about, whoever else had a connection to Epstein. And it's been used as kind of this diversionary mechanism as opposed to what it should be, which is a really legitimate conversation about what happened, who was harmed, and who ultimately needs to be held responsible.
Okay, Prosecutor Mears, give us also, I personally know that you've probably been the best prosecutor we ever had, but what are the focus of the Marion County Prosecutor's Office this year, and what have been done to prevent, we had an upsurge in violence, it's cold weather, it's going way down, so what are the plans of the Marion County Prosecutor's Office going forward?
So, when I have conversations with people in the community, they've made it very clear to me, you need to be on point with homicide cases and you need to be on point with cases involving kids. And so we had one of our highest conviction rates as it related to homicide cases last year. We were over 90%. We were 14 for 14 on sexual assault cases last year going to jury trial. And, jury trials are important to me, not only because I'm a trial lawyer by trade, but also because that's feedback from the community. That's literally people from the community coming in and voting you up or down. Hey, did we meet our burden or not? And so that's incredibly important to me. But at the same time, I realize like we're not going to solve every problem through a courtroom. And we have to be proactive in terms of giving people what they need, and we have to meet people where they're at. And so we are going to continue to double down on our efforts to try to help people get on the right foot and make sure that they have the resources that they need. And I want to be an outcome-oriented prosecutor who's going to tackle root cause issues like housing. I think it's incredibly important that we work really hard to help get people into housing, because if I can get people in housing, if I can help people find jobs, chances are I'm not going to see them in the criminal justice system. And, we have a lot of evidence that supports our position. If you look at the homicide rate in Marion County last year as opposed to what it was 3 or 4 years ago, we've seen a dramatic decrease in the number of homicides. This year, we've seen a dramatic decrease in the number of homicides. And I think that's a reflection of this approach of we're going to try to help people who come back into our community out of the criminal justice system. What can we do to get them on the right foot? And then also, what can we do to try to help people who are struggling with mental health issues, addiction issues, economic issues? How can we put them in a better position so that they can be, good members of our community? The vast majority of people I want are looking to do the right thing. They just need a little help, and we're going to help provide that assistance because when we do, it produces incredible results.
One other thing too that I see that people confuse, there's an Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department and Marion County Prosecutor's Office. And I see that a lot of times people conflate the idea that the prosecutor's office and the police are in cahoots, but you prosecute a record number of police officers that you determined did misconduct. Tell us about that.
Well, and I think one of the things that's why the prosecutor office is so positioned is because, or so important, is because you are in that position where you have to hold people accountable, and this system is set up as checks and balances. And we oftentimes are a check on the police department. And sometimes we have to say, hey, that search warrant's not good enough, or we think, this conduct right here might have violated someone's rights, so we can't file that case, or we need to dismiss that case. And then other times we have to evaluate what police officers are doing and say, hey, did you live up to your standard? And did you potentially violate or break the law? And if it's appropriate for us to file charges, we're certainly going to do that. That doesn't always make us the most popular people in town, but the community deserves that, to know that nobody is above the law, and that if you're someone who's involved in criminal activity, regardless if you wear a badge or not, there can be consequences.
Okay, Vanita, Attorney Banks and Prime, couple minutes. Go ahead. Do you have a question or comment?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to remind everyone, and we'll be talking about this a lot, that the Illinois primary is March 17th, and early voting has already started here in Illinois. And so I'm
March
encouraging
17th. Oh my goodness.
yes, March 17th. There's a very several robust elections, hot elections here in Illinois, including one for the U.S. Senate replacement of Senator Dick Durbin. But early voting has already started here in Illinois. And so I'm encouraging everyone to, of course, register to vote and check your registration regularly. And of course, vote for those candidates that represent your interest.
Prosecutor Mears, when is our election, and who's on the ballot this year in Marion County?
So it's I believe our primary date is May 5th. Early voting will start sometime in April, and the prosecutor is up, the sheriff is up, the clerk is up, and I believe the auditor and the assessor as well. They'll all be on the ballot this year.
We got to get people out to vote. Okay, Attorney Prime, what about Ohio?
Yes, they're coming up as well, and they're very consequential. But I just wanted to make one quick point. We have our prosecutor here, is that it's so important for members of minority communities to think about careers in prosecution. You can do a lot of good, whether it's working in Marion County or working at the U.S. Attorney's Office. In fact, the great Johnny Cochran indicated that some of the most consequential work that he did was when he was an assistant district attorney in L.A. So elections are important in terms of who is ultimately going to be the prosecutor, but the assistants have so much discretion. And it's really important that we let all members of our community know that's important, that they be represented in those important offices and those important positions.
Closing comment, folks. This year, we have to make sure that we vote in the primary and vote in the general election. But that's just not enough. You need to make at least 10 phone calls, your neighbors, your friends. Make sure we get a better turnout this year than we did ever before, because we have a lot at stake. Your vote is more important now than it ever been. So please start working on that and get a plan to vote. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Prosecutor Mears, for helping us today. Take care, everybody.